Hey, hey, hey. Yeah, yeah. Y'all want to check the sound?
Hi, hi. Can you hear me?
Hello,
Is that
hello.
okay?
Yeah. Okay. Bueno, bueno, bueno. Eh, very against all present, past Puerto Rican traditions. We will begin on time. I think that's really funny, personally. I am Raquel Saez-Rivera. I am the 2018-2019 Poet Laureate of Philadelphia. I am from Puerto Rico, and I moved here about 6.5 years ago. And today I'm going to be hosting this event, which is called Navigating Distance, a conversation on contemporary Puerto Rican poetics, both in the diaspora and on the island. And I am accompanied tonight by Cindy Jiménez-Vera
Hi, good evening.
and Denise Froman. I will be introducing each of them, and they will be reading from their work, and then we're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to open it to Q&A. How's that sound? Yeah, okay, we're good. All right. Cindy and I will probably be speaking a lot in Spanish, but I will be the interpreter. So, Denise Froman is an award-winning poet, educator, and performer from New York City. She is a Canto Mundo Fellow, former Women of the World Poetry Slam champion, and National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures grant recipient. Her work has been commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, ESPN, and was featured in the hashtag Here We Are campaign to uplift women's voices, which aired during the Oscars. Her poems have appeared in the Adroit Journal, Nepantla, an anthology for queer poets of color, Women of Resistance, Poems for a New Feminism, and garnered over 10 million views online. She has been a featured speaker at over 200 colleges and universities, hundreds of high schools, nonprofits, and cultural arts spaces, and performed at the White House in 2016. Please help me welcome Denise Froman. Whatever you want.
Okay, I'm gonna get up here. How's everybody doing? Thank you for being here. Can we have another round of applause for Raquel for putting this reading and conversation together? Really important that we build bridges and strengthen the bridges between poets living stateside and poets on the island, our family on the island. I'm gonna read just a couple of poems, and then I think we'll have more poems from Cindy, and I'm so excited that Cindy is here. We're really, really lucky and fortunate, and thank you to everyone that made her visit possible. We need to keep bringing more writers that live on the island here, and we also, I believe, need to go there as well and have that exchange continually happen. So thank you, Raquel, for imagining this. Raquel's been doing a lot of work, which I'll talk about during the panel. So I'm gonna stop there because I could talk about Poets for Puerto Rico all day. Okay, cool. So I feel like the one of the ways that my family's history and my culture, I feel like I have combed through it and preserved it because I don't. For some of us, our family histories can get lost really quickly. And I feel like there is a sense of urgency that I have to sort of comb through the memories and the experiences that I had as a kid when I would visit Puerto Rico in the summer. And my family who lives in Castañer, which is a very, very small campo near Lares. And so this poem is sort of combing through and thinking through and reclaiming a memory that I have of my abuela. I think I was maybe 8 or 9, and I saw her in the backyard kill a chicken with her bare hands, which is very common in the campo. But as someone born in New York City, that was the first time I saw that, and I was a little bit traumatized, but also really intrigued. And I guess it wasn't until I wrote this poem, because I was holding the memory for a long time, and I didn't know why. And I wrote this poem, and I think maybe she was trying to teach me something about grief. Doña Teresa and the chicken. The wooden house in Castañer didn't come with air conditioner or anything cool. The heat was its own kind of music, and so was Abuela, demanding, sharp-tongued. The kind of woman I imagine, whose teeth grew in because she told them to, so the chicken never had a chance. It ran around the backyard flapping its black feathered wings for mercy, for God's attention, but Papa Dios knew better than to get in between a woman feeding her grandkids. I looked over my shoulder, and there she was chasing him. Like an old lover, she came back to haunt, yelling, "Hijo de puta, sinvergüenza, ven acá." Her rosary beads slapped against her chest over and over like a chant, and you knew everything in her path was temporary. Even the wind buckled at the knees at the sight of a woman too wise to act like her blood was softer than it was. And I saw her do it, and I think she knew, because the chicken clucked so hard it spit up its own good throat, and she laughed, grabbed it by the neck, swung it high above her head like a propeller. Once, she gutted Mom's favorite pig with a machete and fed it to her on her 12th birthday. And maybe that's how Mama learned to love us, to kill the thing that feeds you. Years later, she didn't go to her best friend's funeral, or the vecina who mothered her in New York barely made it through abuelas. I suppose all she had was to love until death and no more. So when we got to the funeral home and saw Doña Teresa lying in the casket, arms crossed, chin cocked up, the whole family cried and clawed, wanting her to come back, wanting her to shout, "Didn't I prepare you better than this?"
Woo.
I oftentimes say that I come from women who feel too much to feel too much. They don't have these big sit-down, emotional conversations with you, but you can feel the trauma that they're carrying. And I think one of the things that as I've gotten older and had conversations with my mom more intentionally about her experiences growing up, you can know that your parents have a particular trauma around their places of birth and where they come from, but sometimes it's not till you're older till you can start to really talk about that together. And there were a moment where right after the hurricane, I went home and was talking to my mother about it, and I could tell she was putting a lot of distance between herself and what was happening, and I think that was a byproduct of just the weight that Puerto Rico carries for her, and growing up in Castañer, growing up in deep, deep, deep poverty, and sort of wanting to, sometimes she measures everything by the distance the flight takes from here to Puerto Rico. And so I wonder if what we love is sometimes measured by how long it takes for us to get back there. And so this poem is called, And Mommy Says, Throw Me in the River When I'm Dead. And don't let somebody's God intervene, I suerga. Get rid of my bones. Give me ash. Give me powdered flesh. Give me a New York City skyline. Pour me in the Hudson, but only the middle, the clean part. I tell her, there is no clean part of the Hudson. It's a landfill of things that stay dead and like it that way. And don't you want to be reborn on the other side of hunger? Well, put me where it goes and never stops. And I say, what about Lattice? And she stares at the TV long enough for us to drown in it, her tongue washing up like driftwood. It's gonna rain in New York today, but what about Lattice? I have so many things to do. But what about Lattice? Have you called your father? It could be Lattice or Adjuntas. Listen, I don't really know where I'm from, okay? All we had was green bean soup and the dirt between our toes, and since I didn't have no shoes, I don't want any in the next life. Just put me in the river, where death is an interlude and heaven is a quick name change. Call me butterfly with leopard coat. Call me Seba with wild hair. Call me anything but 6 feet under. This is the only ritual I want. On Wednesday, I call her about a hurricane, and no, I'm not talking about a man, though he will come soon. She says our family is fine. I know this is a language of pain. Says, they know what to do. I know this is a language of survival. Listen, we grew up with that, Nana. But let me tell you, when everything is gone, even the buried feel it. Don't you dare let me keep my body. You hear me? Woo. keep time. I'll read 2 more poems.
Feel free to come on up and sit in the empty seats.
Oh yeah, folks in the back there, seats, benches, and all of that. So in the year since Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and all of the violences that came along and the neglect and reaction from 2 governments that failed the people of Puerto Rico, there have been a ongoing influx of investors from California, in particular, who are seeing an opportunity to make money where there's devastation, right? Disaster capitalism. It's what happened after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and we're seeing something very similar happen to Puerto Rico, right? You have this mass exodus because the people on the island are obviously have been facing a debt crisis that is largely created, or that is created by the colonial status and by the policies enacted by the United States and the violences associated with that. And then, of course, you have this one of the most devastating hurricanes in nearly a century. And so you've got all these people who can't survive, right, in the places where they want to stay. And now you have investors with money and capital who are looking to basically create their own cities, right? And sort of like swoop down and have their own banks and their own hotels and their own airports. There's an article that came out last year called Making a Crypto Utopia. And that details this story, this influx of investors who call the hurricane a perfect storm, right? That's a quote. And who are sort of treating Puerto Rico as a blank slate, as if there are not people and a beautiful culture and folks that are staying and that are already there. And so I wrote a poem. The title is called Puertopia, which pulls from, that's the first name that these investors came up with to name their own city. So it's like literally colonialism 2.0. Obviously, Puerto means port, in Latin, porta, which means gate or door, and utopia comes from modern Latin, the etymology of it, and it means nowhere. So Puertopia means door, nowhere. Puertopia. The cookies don't sing anymore. They click. Mosquitoes turn drone. Metropolis of crypto bro. Tax-deductible greed. An island drowns. A playground emerges, a boy, his toy. Depending on the faith, the most dangerous part of a wealthy man is his index finger. What he points to, who he lands on, a civilization, disposable income, pirate and cargo short, new world, old order. Meanwhile, we, diaspora, separated by sea, peel plátanos, and cut them on the same angle our mothers taught us to clap when the plane lands on either shore. Now, the beaches are gated, and no one knows the names of the dead. Now, investors clean their beaks in the river, and this is how a man becomes a flood. Landlord of nothing, king of no good sky. Watch paradise misbehave. Watch the night pearl into a necklace of fists. Watch this El Yunque, a real God machine, unhinge her jaw and swallow the flock. Where are the Puerto Ricans, huh? Gucci Frito, ghost town, battery operated citizenship. An island is not a tarmac. A disaster is not a destination. Woo. And one more poem. Thank you. So I was in LA a couple of months ago eating at the In-N-Out. Changed my life. If any of you have been to the In-N-Out, it's this amazing burger joint. You can bury me there. So I thought I saw somebody famous, and it's sort of, and I don't know if I did or not. But then the idea came to me, well, like, I'm in LA, of course, like, everybody's famous. And I started to think about this word famous and the culture we have of exclusivity and fanciness and how social media, our feeds can make us feel like imposters, like everybody's feeds are curated to make their lives look perfect and great, right? And pristine. And I thought about this sort of word famous sort of took me off on many different paths. And so this poem is written after a Matthew Olsman poem called Notes Regarding Happiness. And in his poem, sort of, it attempts to follow some of the poetic techniques where he is allowing his mind to take left and right turns and following a set of detours without stopping his creative process. Does that make sense? So, but he tends to sort of circle back to a central idea. And so this poem is sort of a set of detours in that way as well. Everybody's famous in LA. And real quick, I just want to say this poem was written, I feel like each week comes out a new story about the devastation at the border, about the devastation in our streets and in our communities in general. And so I think underneath the political fights and this deep moment of resistance, these movements of resistance that we are in, these turning points, I thought, sometimes when we are fighting for political liberation, which is deeply personal, right, for many of us, that we lose our own sense of self-liberation and healing, because I think healing is really radical and joy is really radical, particularly right now, right? And that boundary can be very difficult for some of us, those of us who are organizers and activists and artists who feel deep responsibility to do everything and be everywhere, how that boundary of like, I actually need some self-care right now can be really difficult. And I think that was some of the ideas I was walking toward in this poem as well. Everybody's famous in LA after Matthew Olsman. Which reminds me that I just bought fancy sheets for the first time in my adult life, which means I'm fancy too now. Which is not what my 3-year-old nephew would say, but absolutely how I felt when he said, Titi, you're my best friend, right? And it's like that. The first time I wore a black suit that hugged my shoulders and not my hips, the sidewalk lit up in a constellation of days-old gum, which is so New York. So I slow danced along the spectacle of 9th Avenue and remembered that I have jumped on more than one occasion at the sight of my own decadence, until a viejita who knew me back when I rocked bangs and an awkward long ponytail asked me what I'm up to these days. And I didn't want to tell her the truth, so I said, I write poems. Instead of my therapist asked if I know what PTSD is. The best front row seats I have are the ones to my own funeral, which feels weird to say because I dream I died and no one showed up. Nobody. Nope. Except maybe for Stan. Yes, Stan, who fixed my flat tire with a hot patch this morning and called himself king. The world is full of VIPs who make minimum wage. I hope I'm still fancy, though I'm not convinced. Here I am, sitting outside of the In-N-Out wanting to high-five the weather that pours out of me, but I don't know how. The only time I won anything was a spring of 96. Remember Lucky? He bet $5 that you could beat all the sticky-fingered boys in a game of 21, and when you won, you ran home, touching all the bases with the ball under your arm like it was a winning lottery ticket, and your mother said, you better not dribble the ball in the house, and don't you dare touch the walls with your dirty fingers. Legendary. Or the time you waited 2 hours outside the Reebok to take a picture of Magic Johnson. When you were 9, he slapped your hand. You wrapped it in plastic that night because it was going to be worth bazillions one day. Your mother ripped it off because saran wrap is expensive and food stamps don't pay for regular people's shit. When you're older, she'll say something about how her house isn't a hotel, so you better stay a little while longer, coño. And speaking of hotels, I'm at a fancy, no, really, 5-star hotel lounging on some Egyptian cotton sheets when the wireless network says there has been an error processing your request. And I remember, she did not break my heart. Only the internet does that. This is why we can't let everyone in, though. This is why we need things like heavy metal doors and passwords for passwords. I'm trying to stay alive here. I'm trying to change my life. Where do I sign up? I'm trying to find the courage to say, no, you can't come in. I poke holes through the night. Baby, I'm a star. Thank you. Woo!
That's my friend. Okay. Thank you, Denise. It is a pleasure now to introduce Cindy Jiménez-Vera. Cindy Jiménez-Vera is the, I kind of regret not having the Spanish for this because we're going to be speaking a lot of Spanish, but it's all right. Cindy Jiménez-Vera is the author of 4 poetry collections, No Lugar, 2017, Islandia, 2015, 400 400 nuevos soles, 2013, en Tegucigalpa, 2012. She has also published a nonfiction book chronicling her trip to San Sebastián, El Salvador, entitled En San Sebastián, Su Pueblo y el Mío, 2014, and a collection of children's poetry, El Gran Cheeseburger y Otros Poemas con Dientes, 2015. Her work has been translated into English, Italian, and Portuguese and published in literary and academic journals, anthologies, textbooks, newspapers, and websites across Latin America, the Caribbean, the U.S., Europe, and elsewhere. A bilingual anthology of a selection of her work is here, not in the works anymore, with English translations by the Puerto Rican poet Guillermo Rebollo Gil. So what we're going to do is Cindy's going to read in the Spanish, and I'm going to read the translation.
That's right. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Raquel, for making it possible, for the invitation and for your generosity. Thank you to the Kelly Writers House. Thank you to the University of Pennsylvania for your generosity and everyone who made possible, my presence here. I'm so honored to be here with Raquel and Denise. It's so beautiful to be together. We were together last month in Puerto Rico at a literary festival, Festival de la Palabra. I would also like to thank my boss, for granting me these 2 days to be here in Philly. And of course, I'm very happy to be here in the land of Rocky Balboa. Yes, it's in my bucket list to write a poem for Rocky. You'll see. I'll do it. Yes. You'll see. Well, as Raquel said, there is this book called "I'll Trade You This Island," and I will read some poems from this book. And if you don't mind, I'm going to use Spanish from now on. Raquel will be reading the English translations. It's not because I feel more comfortable. It's a matter of identity, but also it's my way of connecting with my mother. Of course, we only used Spanish, so to honor her memory, I always read poetry in Spanish. So if it's okay with you, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bueno, voy a empezar leyendo el poema que le da título al libro, I'll Trade You This Island, y en español se titula Canje. Oh, it's okay that I stay here because since Raquel will be reading the translations, is that okay? Yes. It's okay? Okay. Te cambio esta isla por una caja de fósforos y 4 velas para prenderlas por los rincones.
Exchange. I'll trade you this island for a matchbox and 4 candles to light out on the corners.
I would like to say about that, there is a Puerto Rican plena, una canción puertorriqueña de plena. Plena is a genre of music. In the past, we didn't have, like now the internet or anything. So a way of having the news travel, it was with music, singing, specifically singing. Let's say that Angel here, my friend, had just a car accident. So we would say, Angel just had a car accident, and we would sing it, and we would sing what happened, adding humor to what actually happened. And that's how plena began. And there is one plena that says, cuando las mujeres quieren a los hombres, prenden 4 velas y se la ponen por los rincones. And that would be when women are in love with men, they light 4 candles and they put them, in all the corners, like hoping for a miracle, right? So that's why I wrote that poem. That was before 5-category hurricane hit the island, and that comes from a book called 400 Nuevos Soles. Soles is the Peruvian currency, but also means suns in Spanish, like the sun. And that book actually responds to another crisis before the Promesa law became active. So, of course, I'm not going to trade you my island for anything in the universe. But I really sometimes hope for a miracle, but I don't believe in them. We have to actually perform them ourselves. So that's what it is. Bueno, el próximo poema es un personaje de Harper Lee, porque por más problemático que pueda ser ese libro, Matar a un ruiseñor, To Kill a Mockingbird. We need to problematize that book, but also I love it. I think it's wonderful. And, bueno, un personaje de Harper Lee. Soy Jem en Matar a un ruiseñor, porque aunque todo pinta una derrota inminente, en la poesía me aferro a la victoria, y así como el niño de Atticus Finch, sé que terminaré con un brazo roto al final del libro y muerta en la secuela o precuela o versión original a publicarse 55 años después, con fracaso en crítica literaria y en ventas, tanto que hasta las librerías ofrecerán devolverle el dinero a los lectores.
A character of Harper Lee's. I'm Jem from To Kill a Mockingbird because even though a defeat in poetry is all but certain, I cling to victory. And like that, like Atticus Finch's boy, I know I'll end up with a broken arm at book's end and dead in the sequel or prequel or original version to be released 55 years later, a critical and commercial failure, so much so that bookstores will offer to reimburse their readers.
La adultez. A veces busco pretextos para entrar en las oficinas y en los centros comerciales para coger un poco de aire acondicionado. Al principio da placer hacer trampa. La cara no suda, incluso los dedos de los pies en las sandalias agradecen el gesto y hasta se ven limpios, inmaculados. Pero es mucho el sentimiento de culpa que dan la burocracia y el consumo. Salgo rápido de esos lugares. Afuera el frío es otro. No porque baja la temperatura fuera de las alcaldías y los supermercados. Cualquiera queda frío cuando siente hambre o ya ha comido y quiere ir a llorar a la falda de su madre y solo nos queda eso, su falda.
Adulthood. Sometimes I look for an excuse to walk in offices and stores so as to get a little air conditioning. At first it's pleasurable to sneak my way in. The face doesn't sweat. Plus, sandaled toes appreciate the gesture, and they even look clean, immaculate. But the guilt brought on by bureaucracy and consumption is too much. I walk out quickly. Outside, another type of cold awaits. It's not that the temperature drops once out of City Hall and the supermarkets. It's just that anybody turns cold when they're hungry, or having just eaten, and wants to cry at the hem of their mother's skirt. And that's all we have left, her skirt.
Frenesí. Pues mi madre tenía su propia versión de declamar el soliloquio de Segismundo en La vida es sueño de Calderón de la Barca.
My mother had her own version of reading the soliloquio of Segismundo in Calderón de la Barca's La vida es sueño or Life is a Dream.
And the original would say que es la vida un frenesí, que es la vida una ilusión, y terminaba como que los sueños son, ¿no?
So the original say that life was a frenzy. Okay. La vida es un frenzy. Que
La vida es
was
un
an
frenesí, la vida es una
illusion.
ilusión, y los sueños
And
son.
yeah, dreams are just dreams.
But my mom, she had this sense of humor. My mom, she would say, que es la vida un frenesí, que es la muerte una cosita así.
And my mother would say, what is life? A frenzy? What is death? A little thing like this. Una cosita así.
Y yo escribí este poema para ella. Frenesí. La esperanza es audaz. Se mete donde no la llaman. La última vez la vi merodeando el féretro de mi madre. Por momentos podía ver cómo se le metía por los ojos. Hasta llegué a pensar que aquel era el mejor momento para ir a besarla.
Frenzy. Hope is daring. It sneaks in wherever she's not called for. Last time I saw her lurking by my mother's casket. For a moment I could see her slipping in through her eyes. I even came to think the time was right to go and kiss her.
Luna llena. Este es un poema infantil dedicado a las niñas rurales puertorriqueñas. Una vez una niña me contó una fábula. Me decía que la nevera llevaba más de 4 meses sin usarse porque la electricidad se había ido con el último huracán. Con su dedo índice señalaba las sombras de la noche. Decía que eran los dibujos de la luna.
Full moon for rural Puerto Rican girls. One time a girl told me a fable. She said the fridge hadn't been used in 4 months on account of the light being out since the last hurricane. With her index finger, she pointed out shadows in the night. She said they were the doodles of the moon.
De cuando me hice vieja. Me corté el pelo, las uñas y los zapatos. Regalé las faldas, los vestidos y aquellos libros de amor que no sirven. Me quedé con unas enaguas de mi madre, su libro de cocina, una de sus batas de dormir y a la espera de aquellos pantalones que se quedaron en una gaveta de su mesa de noche en turno para que ella les hiciera el ruedo.
Of when I got old. I cut my hair, my fingernails and shoes. I gave away all my skirts and dresses and those useless books on love. I kept some of my mother's slips, her cookbook, one of her nightgowns, and I'm still waiting on those pants left behind in a drawer of her nightstand for her to hem.
La montaña es un poema infantil a Lucas Jimar, el hijo de Guillermo Rebollo Gil.
So this is a children's poem for Lucas Imar, Guillermo Rebollo Gil's son.
Si te presento a mi hermana la montaña, me llevas a conocer el mar. Ella es grande y verde, yo sé que te va a gustar. ¿Quieres ir a oler sus flores? Una a una la podemos buscar. La montaña está contenta, tanto que quiere cantar. Cantamos para bajarla, la besamos y la vamos a abrazar. Al bajarla muy despacito, si quieres la podemos invitar. Iremos los tres de la mano Lucas, iremos los tres al mar.
The mountain for Lucas Imar. If I introduce you to my sister, the mountain, would you take me to meet the sea? She's big and green. I just know you'll love her. Do you want to smell her flowers? We can search for them one by one. The mountain is happy, so much so she's bursting with song. We sing as we go down. We kiss and hug her. If you want, we can invite her to come along. We'll go, the three of us, Lucas. Hand in hand in hand. We'll go, the three of us, to the sea.
Apéndice 20 sobre Harold Bloom. No sé cuántas personas en la isla todavía memorizan poemas. Ahora se enciende el teléfono, se busca lo que se desea encontrar con 1 o 2 clics, se lee, se cierra y poema olvidado. La memoria ya no hace falta. Yo sí memorizo poemas, los míos y los poemas de otros que me gustan mucho. Mi madre memorizaba poemas y me los enseñaba desde pequeña. Así fue como memoricé textos de José P.H. Hernández y Pablo Neruda en la infancia. En la adolescencia me interesaban los poemas de Julia de Burgos, Emily Dickinson y Dorothy Parker. Indian Summer fue como un mantra en la escuela superior. Memorizar un poema es hacerlo parte de tu cuerpo. Si no hay papel, libro, computadora o teléfono celular, el poema está en tu cuerpo. Se dice que la poesía es memoria. Eso lo sabían los juglares. Memorizar un poema lo hace tuyo, porque la mayoría de las veces lo recitas con palabras de menos o palabras sinónimas y le cambias o creas versiones, traducciones, traslaciones de ese poema en tu memoria sin darte cuenta. Ya de adulta oí a Harold Bloom hablar de poesía en una entrevista. Hablaba de memorizar poemas y lo describía como to possess a poem by memory. La palabra posesión me llevó a la palabra carencia, porque de todas las posesiones, aquella de lo que no te puedes desprender ni tampoco puedes llevártela a la tumba, es la que se ha instalado en tu memoria por instancias prolongadas. Eso, en verso o no, es el poema.
Appendix 20 about Harold Bloom. I don't know how many people on the island still memorize poems. Now you turn on the phone and look for whatever you wish to find. With 1 or 2 clicks, you read it, you close the browser, another poem forgotten. Memory is no longer needed. I do memorize poems, mine and those of others that I like a lot. My mother memorized poems, and she would teach them to me since I was a little girl. That's how I came to memorize texts by José P.H. Hernández and Pablo Neruda during my childhood. When I was a teenager, I was into Julia de Burgos, Emily Dickinson, and Dorothy Parker. Indian summer actually was like my mantra in high school. To memorize a poem is to make it part of your body. If there's no paper, book, computer, or cell phone, the poem is in your body. They say that poetry is memory. Minstrels knew that. Memorizing a poem makes it yours because most times you'll recite it with less words or with words that sound like the actual words, and you change it and make variations and translations of the poem in your memory without noticing. As an adult, I heard Harold Bloom talk about poetry in an interview. He was talking about memorizing poems, and he described it as to possess a poem by memory. Possession reminded me of scarcity. Because of all possible possessions, the one that you can't detach yourself from nor take to your grave is the one that has been a fixture of your memory for long stretches of time. That, in verse or not, is the poem.
Yo escribí este poema en el 2012-2013 y solo quería decir eso porque después de el huracán María, cuando empecé a leer este poema porque quería regresar a él, se sentía como si se hubiese escrito en el 2017 y todavía se siente como si fuese algo muy reciente.
So I wrote this poem in 2012, 2013, and I'm mentioning it because when I began reading it again after the hurricane, it felt as if it had been written very recently.
400 nuevos soles. Un periódico latinoamericano informa que Perú ofrece una bonificación de 400 nuevos soles a los empleados de gobierno que obtienen un grado universitario. Tengo 3 de esos. Si hago la conversión de moneda, 400 nuevos soles peruanos son aproximadamente $153 estadounidenses. Con eso, mi pareja y yo pagamos las facturas de electricidad y del agua por un mes, o no las pagamos y compramos comida, o no comemos ni tenemos servicio de agua y luz y pagamos la cuenta del celular con algunos atrasos pendientes, o no hacemos nada de eso. Igual, en Puerto Rico, los huracanes y sus amenazas nos dejan sin servicio de agua potable, electricidad, telecomunicaciones y con alimentos de reputación dudosa. Mejor, fornicamos borrachos en el ojo de la tormenta. Él, despedido de una compañía que se fue a la quiebra. Yo, con 2 trabajos que no suman 1, un vientre despoblado de hijos y algunos poemas con pocas palabras. Los bancos no saben de conversión de monedas. 400 nuevos soles es más de un año de amaneceres.
400 new soles. A Latin American newspaper informs that Peru offers a bonus of 400 new soles to government employees upon obtaining their university degree. I got 3 myself. If I do the currency conversion, 400 new Peruvian soles are approximately $150 American, enough for my partner and myself to cover our water and light bills. Or we don't pay our bills and buy food. Or we do without water, electricity, and food, and we pay our cell phone, including the late charges. Or we don't do any of that, considering that in Puerto Rico, hurricanes and their warnings leave us without water service, electricity, and telecommunications, and with highly suspicious food supplies. We'd rather make love drunk in the eye of the storm. He having been let go from a company that went bankrupt, me with 2 jobs that don't make one, a belly empty of children, and some poems with too few words. Banks don't know anything about currency conversion. 400 new soles are more than a year's worth of dawnings.
Disculpa, hice un cambiecito. De la página 36.
36, dale.
This poem, the title of this poem, belongs to a series of little poems that I titled using actual questions from interviews that they... I don't know, literary magazines ask you questions and they want to interview you. And then I don't remember from where, if it was from Spain, Chile, Peru, I don't know where, but they asked me this. And I don't remember very well what I answered at the time, but then this should be the correct answer to that question. So I'll read it for you. ¿Podría hablarnos sobre la memoria histórica de su país? No sabría responder. El lugar donde se nace es puramente incidental. El cuerpo de la madre es nuestro país de origen. Nacer es el primer exilio. Caminar por la tierra es una eterna diáspora. Duele nuestra condición de forasteros, saber que no volveremos nunca, ni vivos ni muertos, a nuestro lugar.
Could you talk to us about your country's historical memory? I wouldn't know how to answer. One's place of birth is purely incidental. The mother's body is our true country of origin. Being born is the first exile. To walk the earth is an eternal diaspora. Our condition of strangers hurts. To know we'll never return, neither dead nor alive, to the place where we belong.
Mi biografía como una entrada de Wikipedia. El problema de estas entradas no es la veracidad, la confiabilidad o la apuesta al futuro de su contenido. El problema es no podar los párpados de todas aquellas veces que viste llorar a tu madre, o la imposibilidad de describir el olor de sus manos cuando te dolía la panza y ella te servía té de menta. Ahora, propongamos una referencia cruzada a la imagen de cómo sería verla envejecer mientras eres tú quien te haces viejo, se te caen los dientes, te da estreñimiento y no te da la jubilación para cubrir los costos del hogar de ancianos que debiste pagar a plazos con un trabajo seguro que nunca estuvo a tu alcance, como envejecer tampoco estuvo al alcance de ella. Por eso es necesario el anonimato de estas entradas enciclopédicas justificado con la filosofía de creación colectiva y acceso democrático. Nadie es capaz de contarle a los lectores, quienes copiarán y pegarán estos datos en algún proyecto para su clase de español, que la autora nunca volvió a escribir como lo hacía antes de la muerte de su madre. Eso seguramente Wikipedia lo ha almacenado en su lista de lugares comunes de poetas menores de América Latina, claro, porque a las Antillas nadie las menciona. ¿Quién más tendrá el valor de reclamar la autoría de esta entrada? Por eso la verticalidad de estas poquísimas líneas, para engañar a los algoritmos y hacerles creer que hemos escrito un poema.
My biography is a Wikipedia entry. The problem with these entries is not the accuracy, reliability, or sustained relevance of their content. The problem is not severing your eyelids from all those times you saw your mother cry, or the impossibility of describing the smell of her hands when your tummy hurt and she would bring you mint tea. Now, let's cross-reference the image of how it would be to watch her grow old while it is you that grows old. Your teeth fall out, you get constipated, and your pension is not enough to cover the home for the elderly, which you should have paid for on a monthly basis, with a stable job that was never within your reach, like growing old was always out of hers. And so the philosophy of collective authorship and democratic access comes to require that these entries remain anonymous. Nobody is able to tell readers, who will dutifully copy and paste your biographical details for some Spanish project, that the author could never write quite like she did before her mother's death. Though I'm quite sure Wikipedia has this information stored somewhere in its inventory of cliches from the lives of the minor poets of Latin America, because of course nobody ever mentions the Antilles. Who else would be brave enough to claim authorship of such an entry? Hence the upright character of these scarce lines, so as to fool the algorithms into believing that a poem has been written.
El hijo imaginario. Tengo un hijo que nunca parí, nunca he parido a nadie, pero es mi hijo. Todas las mañanas se me acerca, me besa, me abraza, me pide la bendición, aun sabiendo que no creo en dioses, pero es mi hijo. Nunca le di de comer, nunca lo vestí. De hecho, quiero convencerlo de quitarse la medalla de San Benito del Rosario que se empeña en llevar colgado del cuello, pero no tengo éxito. Es para que me libre de tentaciones, madre, dice mi hijo imaginario. En este punto, querido lector, no me tengas pena por haberme imaginado un hijo. Parra se imaginó un hombre, una casa, el amor de una mujer. Mejor tenme pena porque por más que quiero que mi hijo imaginario se afiance a la razón y deje de creer en la inexistencia divina, todas las mañanas le sigo dando la bendición en el nombre de su Dios imaginario.
The imaginary son. I have a son I didn't give birth to. I've never given birth to anybody, but he's my son. Every morning he comes by, he kisses me, he hugs me. He even asks for my blessing, knowing that I don't believe in gods, but he's my son. I never fed him or clothed him. Actually, I'm trying to convince him to take off the San Benedict medal from the rosary around his neck. But I haven't succeeded. It's to free me from temptation, mother, says my imaginary son. At this point, dear reader, don't pity me for making up a son. Parra imagined a man, a house, and the love of a woman. Pity me, rather, because in spite of my desire for my son to see reason and cease believing in divine inexistence, I keep giving him my blessing in the name of his imaginary God.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias. All right, thank you. Okay. So I would like us to have a conversation. I'm going to ask Denise some questions. I'm going to ask Cindy some questions, and then they're going to ask each other some questions, and then we're going to open to general questions. How's that feel? Yeah? How we doing? All right. So Denise, who were your greatest literary influences, and how many of those were Puerto Rican?
That's a great question. So I left high school thinking that Latinos and Puerto Ricans in particular didn't write poetry, which is a misconception and a lie, and a really violent one, and a really dangerous one. And it's one that a lot of young students of color unfortunately experience because of the way the public education and literature in our schools is curated. We have writers of color sort of peppered in, but not sort of a curriculum filled with the contributions. And that extends to history classes, right? And so on and so forth, and science classes. And so I think hip-hop in particular and spoken word were my entry points into language. And so I would say my first literary influence was like Mos Def and Black Thought and Common. Those were just people that were sort of showing me the power of language and of the oral tradition and of storytelling. And I was like entranced and fell in love. And then right around the same time, almost immediately after, I went to the New Rican Poets Cafe for the first time. And it felt like there existed this entire world of my people and my community that I was removed from in terms of actual poetry on a stage, right? I think the more I think about it, there were poetic elements throughout my upbringing and childhood, but we have a particular way we think about poetry, right? And it's a very narrow perception of it. And so I think my perception of poetry widened. And so I would definitely not be here if it weren't for a lot of the poets that came out of the New Rican poetry movement. And HBO Def Poetry Jam was a big introduction for me in the early 2000s. So La Bruja, Mayra del Valle, Lemon, Flaco, these are New Rican poets that came before me that absolutely widened the door and really made me think, we can talk about our culture, we can talk about what it means to grow up in New York, and it's like this mezclado of like language and culture, because I think growing up, there are conversations around race and ethnicity and culture felt very black and white. And for many of my friends and myself, we felt like we had one foot in two places, and more than two places. And I think these poets really were they were the history classes we didn't have. They were the English classes we deserved. And I would say without their presence, they were the first sort of storytellers and poets that cracked open my imagination. Yeah.
And how many poets were you reading, like, from the island? When was that happening? Did that happen for you?
That was not happening early on. I think I was sort of diving into exploring what was around me first, and then things related to the island felt so family oriented. Like that's where we go to visit family. That's where like my abuela is. So things related to the island for most of my life have felt separated from poetry, in that because my memories were all about my sort of reconnecting and connecting and holding on to that connection with my family that's there, right? And the times that I went to Puerto Rico, I didn't have much alone time, and I wasn't old enough to drive, right? And so it took a long, long time. It wasn't until the last, bunch of years that I've really been, it's been really important to me to listen to and to read more poets that were from the island. But of course, there are a lot of poets in New York that were born in Puerto Rico and have family there. And so that felt like the most comfortable place to land first. And I feel like now I'm tracing it back and deepening that lineage of.
Do you think that relates in any way to your queerness?
In what way? What do you mean? Like,
I mean, I think, for example, associating the island with family, right? Like, your relationship with family has been a little complicated by your queerness. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you didn't have a lot of space for your queerness when you would visit the island?
No, not at all. That was something that I think I put a lot of distance between. I mean, also when I visited, I was very young, and so I wasn't aware of, I didn't explore my queerness yet. And then I think when I did, I really felt like I had a lot of work to do in exploring my Latinidad and my family's history and my ancestry as a young adult. And so I feel like my queerness took a back seat, and I felt like I wanted to build a stronger bridge for that. And also, like, I felt like my plate was full with my queerness. Like, sometimes I have to walk through something before I can share it with everybody else. And I feel like there were some things happening around that time where I was sort of prioritizing what felt most important, depending on where I was. But my queerness for most of like those years I was in Puerto Rico was something that I was still keeping close to the chest in some ways. So I wasn't ready, but I also wasn't ready to tell my family in New York either.
Where would you see the current relations in terms of poetry in the diaspora and poetry in the island? And where do you think diasporic writers could do a better job? And, kind of...
Yeah. This is what we've been talking about. And I can only speak for myself. There's no monolithic, experience of Puerto Rican writers in New York. I'm just or that are from New York. The people that I've talked to, the people that the Puerto Rican writers I'm in community with have a deep desire to, again, build that bridge and strengthen that bridge and have that connection, between writers that live here and also writers that live on the island. But there's also a lot of projection and shame around the distance that stands in the way, around language barriers that stand in the way, around being Puerto Rican enough, around being Latino or Latinx enough, that I've had to walk through with, writer friends of mine. And so I think there's a lot of possibility and a lot of hope, and I'm really hopeful, and I think it's really important to have that connection. But I also think that, my sense is some writers feel like will I be accepted? Will I be received? Am I wanted, right? Or is my presence sort of representing a power dynamic that is not my intention, right? Which I think is really thoughtful and important to think about, right? Like, our own privileges, our own perspectives and experiences are not necessarily like the same, right? It doesn't always translate, but that's okay, right? That's okay. And so I'm really excited about the work that we're doing right now with Poets for Puerto Rico, which is a movement that was founded by Willie Perdomo. And it's a collective of Puerto Rican writers standing in solidarity with those living on the island. And we've raised funds, but also want to raise consciousness, right? We want spaces of listening. And I think that Puerto Rican writers on the island have to do a much better job of listening and have to make a much deeper commitment and a lot more effort. Language barriers isn't an excuse anymore to me, but I've had to walk that out, right? It just requires a particular effort. And so I wasn't, I speak conversational Spanish. And a lot of the Puerto Rican writers I know, we know Spanish, but we're not fluent in it. And so I think there's just more work that we have to do to, on our part, which might feel weird, right? Because growing up speaking English and Spanglish, everything doesn't need to be translated for us. What does it mean for us to have to listen and learn? and prioritize Spanish in certain spaces, right? Or at as many spaces as we can. So I'm really, really hopeful and excited about the work that we're doing now, but we do have a lot of work to do.
So just the last kind of follow-up question. You mentioned that one of the fears is, will I be accepted? Will my presence, will I be able to like communicate and move through those spaces? Will my presence be kind of like an external presence, or will there be a power dynamic? You've recently gone back at least twice within the last year. So do you feel accepted? Do you feel like
I had a great experience. So I performed for the first time, like as an invited poet, last month, and that was really, really special for me. We came with Raquel, coordinated a lot of this initiative, and we were able to bring a group of poets from Puerto Rico, one of whom had never been to the island. And these are the kinds of experiences and connections that we want to make. I felt welcomed. I think I was really nervous. I think I ultimately want to share my poems in Spanish. I think that's something I should work, that I'm working toward. But I was concerned about sharing poems in English. Because I believe when you go somewhere, you should try to speak the language of that place, right? Out of respect. But I guess, Cindy, you have a lot to say around that. But I think I felt really welcomed, but I also it was one visit, and so I'm excited to learn more, and continue that relationship.
¿Tienes algo que decir, Cindy?
Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it.
When you said out of respect, well, I come from a country that history hasn't allowed us to be a country, and we have been colonized twice. The first for 500 years in Spanish, and now in English. But we have resisted. And so using Spanish when I come to the United States, yes, as I said earlier, I do it because it's a matter of identity. I do it for connection with my mom, but I also do it as resistance. I have an aunt who lives in New York she's been living there for almost 60 years. And she never learned English. And like Pedro Muir said in one poem, now that's what I call intelligence.
Entonces te pregunto, Cindy, vamos a usar eso como para comenzar. ¿Crees que la dinámica de poder entre el inglés y el español cambia esa ecuación un poco? Es decir, como si Denise fuese a ir a Puerto Rico y hablar inglés, no sería un acto de resistencia, ¿no?
No, en ese caso cambia. ¿Sabes por qué? Porque Puerto Rico, a pesar de ser un territorio de Estados Unidos, Puerto Rico es Caribe, y el Caribe es políglota, es diaspórico y es salado. En Aruba, por ejemplo, te hablan 5 idiomas: inglés, español, francés, papiamento y holandés. Cualquier persona en Aruba te habla mínimo 5 idiomas. Cuando yo voy al Caribe, porque he ido mucho al Caribe por cuestiones de trabajo, a dar talleres y demás, yo tuve que aprender idiomas. Para varios viajes en específico, yo poder dar talleres en francés. Yo estudié francés 1 año intensivo en la Alianza Francesa. Cuando voy a Haití, pero es que la mayoría habla en creol haitiano. Ajá. Así que yo estaba hablando mi francés recién aprendido y alguien estaba ayudando a traducir en creol haitiano. Ese es el Caribe. La cosa cambia cuando vas a la colonia. Así que yo pienso que en el caso de Denise no tienes obligatoriamente que por qué publicar en español en Puerto Rico. Yo como editora, que te hice un acercamiento para publicar tu poesía en Ediciones Agua Dulce, que es una editorial que dirijo, En ningún momento pensé incluso en traducirla en español. Pienso que la poesía de Denise es poesía puertorriqueña. No importa que sea en inglés, es poesía puertorriqueña. Por lo menos a mí como lectora, como poeta y como editora. Porque venimos de esa tradición, igual que en el Caribe. O sea, somos multilingües, somos políglotas. El Caribe es eso, es esta polifonía, es este sonido de voces hermosas y acentos y ritmos, ¿no? No sé si se percataron, pero cuando Denise estaba leyendo en español había un ritmo, había música. Eso no se hace con toda la poesía que se escribe en este país. Uno no siente igual, ¿no? Y yo sentía Caribe.
I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna try and summarize that. So I asked Cindy if she felt that the response that Denise had to going to Puerto Rico was different than the response she had to coming to the U.S. because of the power relation between Puerto Rico and the U.S. And Cindy said, interestingly, that she felt that in the case of Denise going to Puerto Rico, it was very valid that she produce her work in English because the Caribbean is polylingual. And it's actually very common in most places in the Caribbean for it to be polylingual. And she used the example of Aruba, which is a place, I didn't know I thought they spoke 4, but Cindy says they speak 5 languages by the time they graduate from high school. Papiamentu, Portuguese, Dutch, Spanish, and ¿qué más? English. And so that's very common in the Caribbean. And she also said that when she went to Haiti, to Haiti, she had to have a translator because they speak Creole in Haiti. And she spoke...
And I was using French.
Yeah, she was using French. And so they also had to have a translator. And so basically she said as an editor, as a poet, she felt that it was very important that Denise's work be published in English in Puerto Rico because Denise is a Puerto Rican writer who writes in English. And
her work is Puerto Rican poetry.
Yeah, and her work is Puerto Rican poetry.
Absolutely.
Es muy interesante.
Absolutely, because of the rhythm and because of the subject matter, what she talks about. We want to hear that part of the conversation. In the island, we don't get to hear that part of the conversation. So we want to stop having a monologue. We want to really, really have a dialogue.
Yeah.
And this generation that's coming, of course we can read in English. We maybe don't want to. And when I say we, I generalize, but yes, we read in English, and we have the influence, of course, the media, the internet, television. Even in Spain, they say bacon. They don't say tocino. They say bacon in Spain. I was there last summer, and I would ask for bacon in Spanish, and they would, and I would say tocino, the actual word, the dictionary word, and they were like, "What? Bacon?" So you see?
Yeah.
So
I think I would like to talk more about the language because I know when we talked earlier about the New Rican poetry movement, that was such a safe haven for those of us who grew up speaking Spanglish, right? It felt like we didn't have to make those choices, right? We could speak in the ways in which we grew up speaking at home. And I think for me, I think a lot of it, when I went this time to Puerto Rico, particularly, I felt like I wanted to ask, we had conversations around what kind of work that I would share and if that was okay in the languages in English, because I think permission is really important. I think asking those questions and, when I think of Puerto Rico, none of my family on the island speak English, right? And so when I go there, I have to speak Spanish, which I'm really happy to do. And I think for me, it was sort of, again, maybe my own family and my own mother's voice in my head, feeling like there was, like I should be sharing my poems in Spanish. And I think it was really liberating in a way, in a weird way, to say, no, you come as you are. You come as you are, and share your work in that way. And I was surprised in that way. Because every time I've gone to Puerto Rico, there's been a lot of I have to speak in Spanish, you know, which I think is important. It's really important not to I also didn't want to come and prioritize English, right, in those spaces. Yeah.
Ahora te pregunto a ti, Cindy, y también a Denise. A ambas les voy a preguntar. ¿Me entiendes más o menos, Denise? Así que después lo traduzco. ¿Cuál, Cindy, desde la isla, desde la literatura isleña, desde los poetas puertorriqueños, a tu entender, cómo ven la poesía diaspórica? ¿Cuán frecuentemente leen la poesía de puertorriqueños acá? O en la diáspora, que no solo acá, ¿verdad? La diáspora incluye otros lugares, pero casi siempre es en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y a Denise te pregunto, ¿no? ¿Cuántos poetas puertorriqueños acá leen a poetas de la isla? Y que hablen un poco sobre esa distancia y ese abismo que hay literario y en términos de voces literarias.
Sí. Bueno, del término en la isla, es muy poca la poesía de puertorriqueños que publican en los Estados Unidos, que llega, que circula. O sea, que hay un gran problema de circulación y distribución de los libros de autores puertorriqueños que se publican acá y que llegan a la isla. Si quieres traducir esa parte.
Yeah. So I asked them both, I asked Cindy how many poets on the island read poets in the diaspora, both here and everywhere, but mostly in the U.S. diaspora. And I asked Denise how many poets in the diaspora read Puerto Rican poets on the island. And Cindy answered that she felt that it was very few diasporic poets that get read on the island because of problems of circulation of texts and the distribution of texts.
Of course. Y que si no los están asignando en algún curso universitario, es muy poco probable que las pocas librerías que hay en Puerto Rico se interesen por traer esos libros. Entonces hay un trabajo que hacer por crear ese interés. Entonces, si no es porque los que estamos, además de la poesía, inmersos en edición y buscando, ¿no?, voces y buscando vínculos entre los poetas de la isla y los poetas de la diáspora, entonces creo que no habría tanto interés, ¿no? Se sigue pensando en los poetas de la diáspora, en Pedro Pietri, en Tato Laviera, en Miguel Piñero, ¿verdad?, en Víctor Hernández Cruz, etcétera. Se sigue pensando que la diáspora es eso. De la misma manera que probablemente nuestros compañeros poetas puertorriqueños en la diáspora piensen que los poetas de Puerto Rico son Julia de Burgos, Juan Antonio de Correger, ¿verdad? A lo sumo, ¿no? José de Diego, quizá. Eso.
No dudo, pero yeah. So Cindy's answer was that also if the texts don't get assigned by professors and by teachers, then the books don't get ordered and people don't learn about them, and that she feels that writers on the island, when they think of diasporic poets, are still thinking about Pedro Pietri, about Víctor Hernández Cruz, about Miguel Piñero, Tato Laviera, and they just don't have any, I guess, like contemporary
Exactly.
poets to think of, in the same way that she feels that probably poets here in the diaspora, when they think of Puerto Rican poets on the island, think of Julia de Burgos, or maybe José de Diego and Juan Antonio Correger, but they don't also know contemporary Puerto Rican poets on the island writing in Spanish.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. I think, you know, particularly if you want to talk about the schools and the literature, we're barely assigned books by Latinx writers, period, right? Also, our publishers here, they're not thinking about poets that are living in Puerto Rico, or even poets that are writing in Spanish, right? We've had a number of incidences where there have been special issues. Publications love to do special issues, all of a sudden, and are just including poems only in English, and that can be really problematic, especially if your issue is about anything related to Hurricane Maria, right, or anything related to Puerto Rico now, period. I do think it's really important to include poets living on the island, but there is that disconnect on the publishing level, in the school level, and even in our bookstores, right? I don't know off the top of my head of a bookstores here selling books by authors on the island, and we need to change that, right?
All right, so I invite you both to ask each other any questions that you have.
Before
Yes.
I ask a question to Denise, just one.
I know I have.
I would like to say that that as Raquel mentioned, I also direct a small press that publishes poetry in Puerto Rico since 2012, and what we have been doing, little baby steps, little by little, we started a collection of translations, bilingual books. And in 2019, we want to be working with that. In fact, Raquel Salas Rivera is working on a book that will be part of that collection, bilingual book. I also invited Denise. It's an open invitation, so whenever she feels like she wants to publish her work, of course, she's more than invited. But we also, in 2016, we did this little experiment with a bilingual book by the American poet Summer Browning. In that case, Guillermo Rebollo Gil, a Puerto Rican poet, translated some of her poetry into Spanish. And I just wanted to test the waters and see how the readers in Puerto Rico would react with small bilingual poetry books. And the response, let's say that it has been 50-50. It has been well received by the academics, by professors. It even had book reviews, very good book reviews. But it's not like I wake up this morning and I really want to buy that poetry book, that bilingual book. But it was a very nice experiment. And, when you are in the in this mission of publishing poetry, of course, you're not going to live with it. I mean, you don't do this because you need the money. I'm a school librarian by day, just like Barbara Gordon, that girl. And I do this because I do believe in poetry, and I'm hoping that Ediciones Agua Dulce, the press that I direct, be more than a liaison. I would like to use a better word, but to be this point, este punto de encuentro, and this safe place where poets from the island and poets from the diaspora, Puerto Rican poets from the diaspora, would just become that, Puerto Rican poets, period, without a label, if that is possible, that utopia is possible. And in, I don't know, Denise, if you want to ask me
Yeah,
something.
I have questions. So, I don't know which one to ask. I have more than one. You talked about memorization in one of the poems that you shared. And coming from the spoken word tradition, memorization is both sacred to poetry and sacred to us. You talked about the poem living in the body, right? And particularly when you share it with an audience, this becomes communal, right? And the energy is created and shared, and the poem takes on a new form. Are poets on the island memorizing their poems? Is that something that is regularly happening and expected?
Yes. This generation of poets, of Puerto Rican poets in the island, we do, and we perform. Some of us, we perform, we recite our poems, and usually when I teach poetry writing workshops, different museums and cultural centers usually invite me to teach poetry writing. One part of the workshop, I ask, can you recite a poem? Because I read an interview by Tracy K. Smith, the poet laureate of the United States, the current poet laureate of the United States, and she said that if you ask anybody, there's always a poem that you carry. Always a poem that you carry. So I asked that to all of the participants of that workshop. And usually they end up reciting almost a whole poem or a fragment or something. And yeah, we all carry a poem. And in that sense, I don't know if this is the moment, or maybe we should do it when we finish with this, but I would like the audience who would like to share maybe a fragment of a poem that you carry. And That's my question for you. Besides your own poems that you memorize, which one is a poem written by, I don't know, somebody that you carry?
Oh my gosh, I carry so many fragments. The end of one of Chedi Moraga's poems, or being female and queer, is as rude as we can get. I carry a lot of Araceli Escamai's work in my body. I don't want to get the quote wrong, but it's in my phone.
Google that.
No, I don't have to Google it. It's the first thing right here. You who cannot hear or cannot know the terrible intricacies of our species, our minds, the extent to which we have done what we have done, and yet the depth to which we have loved what we have loved, is one of my favorite poetic lines. There are so many writers that I adore, but I think those are the fragments that I carry.
I know this is cheating, but Raquel,
Yeah,
which
Raquel.
poem do you carry?
I carry a fragment of a Julia de Burgos poem. Que mi abuelo fue el esclavo, es mi pena, si hubiese sido el amo, sería mi vergüenza. You guys know that? Ángel. So if that my grandfather was a slave is my sorrow. Had he been the master, it would have been my shame. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so before we let's get questions from the audience. First, let's have a round of applause for Cindy and Denise. And I welcome you all to come forward with any questions for our two guests. Don't be shy.
I've got a question. Denise, so have you ever written... thank you. I just wanted to ask if you've ever actually written a poem in Spanish completely, and if so, how do you determine when it's necessary to write a poem in Spanish, when it's necessary to write a poem in English, and when you just decide to write in Spanglish?
Yeah. I think now I use the words in Spanish that I use in my poetry are words that I grew up with, that I know. They're not words I learned later on. And I feel like that's where I feel most comfortable, pulling from and exploring and just using the language that I have. And I think as I get more proficient and more comfortable, because sometimes you're proficient but you're not always comfortable, I think I'll be writing probably fuller in more in Spanish. But I haven't written a whole poem in Spanish yet. But I think it's really possible for sure, and that's a hope. That's a hope that I have.
That would be lovely. I think that even if you don't feel like confident in your linguistic abilities in Spanish, you should totally do it anyway. I mean, your poetry is beautiful in English. I mean, I love it.
Thank you.
But it's an exercise, and I think that it would be probably a liberating exercise.
I think what's important to me is reading poems in Spanish now, and listening to poems in Spanish, and then maybe I will write them. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Pega. This
Hi.
is kind of a dorky question. It's for both of you. I'm just curious if you have a favorite poem of your own that you've written for both of you.
Un poema favorito tuyo.
Ah, wow.
I think I'm in love with the poems I haven't written yet. That's a real answer.
That's a cop out.
No, that's not. That's how I feel. That's really how I feel. It's like choosing children. You all have a favorite, but you never tell anybody.
That's more honest.
Cindy's laughs are everything.
They tell me that.
Yeah.
Every time. Oh.
No, te toca.
Oh, I have to answer that.
Yeah. You can't
But I was
escape.
laughing.
Yeah.
You can't laugh your way out of that question.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'll answer it. I'm going to recite it. Mi topoiesis. I think it's in here.
Búscalo.
Mi topoiesis.
Yo lo busco.
Okay. Bueno.
Got it.
Mi topoiesis. Aquel día llegó con una carta de desalojo en las manos. Fue así, como el horno, las cortinas, las gavetas y los zapatos dejaron de aparecer en aquellos poemas domésticos.
Mythopoesis. The day arrived with an eviction notice in hand. That's how the oven, the drawers, the curtains, and the shoes all stopped showing up in those domestic poems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I wonder how you three feel about other Latin American or even Spanish poets that are in a position of diaspora or exile themselves. And also, my second question is like, how comfortable you feel with the term Latino that seems to like bring all these multiple identities together without like meaning that much. I think like many details of these identities get lost in the term Latino. How do you feel about it?
Okay. ¿Cómo me siento como poesía latinoamericana, como poeta latinoamericana?
¿Cómo te sientes?
El adjetivo latino aquí en Estados Unidos.
¿Cómo te sientes sobre otras poblaciones diaspóricas
Ajá.
que no sean puertorriqueñas?
Ajá.
¿Y cómo te sientes sobre el término latino? Que borra muchas de las identidades
Claro.
dentro de eso.
Claro, of course. Sí, bueno, te voy a responder en español, ¿está bien? Entonces Raquel me va a ayudar. Sí, bueno. Pues mira, en uno de mis poemas en el que hablé de la biografía de Wikipedia, ahí creo que hablo un poquito y menciona un poquito, porque sí, los puertorriqueños, claro, somos Latinoamérica y somos latinos, pero yo siempre me siento muy antillana y muy caribeña. Y es algo que se tiende a invisibilizar. Y cuando se piensa en el Caribe, pues es muy fácil, la gente piensa Cuba. Pero el Caribe es Puerto Rico, es República Dominicana, es Haití, es Jamaica, es Saint Martin, es Curazao, es Aruba, Belice, bueno, es picando a Centroamérica, o sea, es tantas cosas, ¿no? El Caribe es muchos idiomas, el Caribe es mucha agua de por medio entre isla e isla, por eso es que nuestra naturaleza es diaspórica y es políglota. Así que claro que me siento latinoamericana. El mes pasado estaba en la Filzócalo en México con todos mis compañeros poetas de Latinoamérica, de esta generación, que fue hermoso sentirme parte de esa familia. Pero sobre todo porque estaba con mis compañeros cubanos, dominicanos, o sea, esa antillanía que me parece importante y que se tiende a borrar cuando se habla de lo que es Iberoamérica, Hispanoamérica, Latinoamérica, ¿no? Y yo creo que eso le pasa un poco a Centroamérica, no solo el Caribe. Le pasa mucho a nuestros compañeros de Centroamérica María, como por ejemplo a los nicaragüenses, a los salvadoreños, a los panameños, costarricenses, ¿no? Y es algo de lo que también se habla. Pero si entonces empezamos...
Dame un brequecito.
Ah, sí.
Okay. I'm going to try and summarize that as best I can. Me lo pusiste difícil.
de la antillanía. Claro que
Yeah,
somos
so I
latinoamericanos.
feel that not only do I feel identified as a Latin American, but more specifically as a Caribeña, or a person from the Caribbean, because the Caribbean isn't just the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, but includes all of the Caribbean, and I'm not going to list it, but she's really good at listing it. Then Cindy kind of went on to talk a little bit about her recent trip to La Flia Zócalo, Mexico, and like different festivals, and kind of like what kinds of movements she's done to like connect to other Latin American and Central American authors.
Y quería decir que, por ejemplo, la selección y el prólogo de este libro que traigo acá, que lo ha traducido en inglés Guillermo Rebollo Gil, la hizo un poeta mexicano actual, Jorge Posada. No el jugador de pelota, sino el poeta mexicano Jorge Posada Ortega. Y sí, me siento latinoamericana y tengo una relación increíble. De hecho, aquí también se menciona la crítica de mi obra que hace un poeta peruano. O sea, claro, yo soy Latinoamérica, por supuesto. Y aquí en los Estados Unidos, ser Latinex es ser uno, o lo veo así yo. O sea, somos todos, ¿no? Juntos. Yo creo que es importante recordar eso. Ahí tampoco, entonces, quitarnos esas etiquetas de Puerto Rico, México. Costa Rica, Brasil incluso, que ya es otro idioma, es portugués, pero aquí somos todos uno.
She also mentioned that the prologue to her book was written by a Mexican poet, Posada, Jorge Posada, and she talked a little bit about basically, my position is that Latinx is much like the term Latin American in the sense that like we leave aside our national identifications to become kind of one under the term of Latinx. It's interesting. Por mi parte, yo creo que son contextos bien diferentes. Por ejemplo, yo en Puerto Rico me identificaba como puertorriqueña. No, el término Latinx realmente no se utilizaba, pero estaba consciente de que existía tal cosa como la literatura latina en Estados Unidos, y lo pensaba como algo muy de ser inmigrante en Estados Unidos. Y pues yo respeto eso como un contexto y como algo que se produce de la especificidad de vivir en un lugar totalmente nuevo y del discurso de ese lugar. So for me, right, when I was in Puerto Rico, I never identified as Latinx because we all identified as Puerto Rican. And, it was thought of as like, this term, like Latinx was something that happened in the U.S. It wasn't something that happened in Puerto Rico. And so, but I respect contexts a lot. So I always thought, well, that comes from a specific context. It's something that happens when people migrate, and then they create as kind of like their own identities in that context, and that has a reason for existing in that place. And so I knew of like Latino literature, but like it was like this thing that happened in the United States. It was very much a product of migration. Y en términos de si yo me identifico como Latinx, bueno, ya soy parte de una diáspora, ¿no? Quizá una diáspora nueva, pero no me molesta que me identifiquen como Latinx, aunque honestamente, si me preguntan, soy puertorriqueña. So, like, do I identify as Latinx? Like, I'm already part of a new diaspora, so I don't mind being called Latinx, but, if I'm asked, I identify as Puerto Rican. O puertorriqueña. Y en términos de otros inmigrantes, yo creo que es bien importante recalcar lo que he recalcado básicamente desde el huracán, pero en los últimos años especialmente, que es que el argumento de que los puertorriqueños deberían recibir ayuda porque son ciudadanos americanos es un argumento sumamente jodido. Y que creo que es uno que tenemos que dejar a un lado porque no solo porque debemos mostrar solidaridad, ¿no? con todos los inmigrantes, no solo los que tienen el privilegio de tener ciudadanía americana, sino porque también hay mucho que podemos aprender de otras experiencias diaspóricas y de inmigración que no son la puertorriqueña. Y ese es un momento, ¿no? Donde el colonialismo lo internalizamos un poquito en ese momento. Yo creo que ese es un instante donde sí lo internalizamos. So I'm going to say what I've been saying for a long time, which is that especially after the hurricane, that this argument that Puerto Ricans should receive aid because they're U.S. citizens is a really messed up argument, and that we actually have to like see that as the privilege that it is. In terms of other like migrant groups and other people who have migrated here who don't have citizenship, and that we have to leave that to one side and show solidarity, not just because that is what we should do, but also because we have a lot to learn from other basically migrant populations who have had experience with being undocumented for a really long time. And that is a moment of internalized colonialism, and in which we reproduce internalized colonialism, and I think we have to break with that.
Again, I'd like to add, if I may, to her question, that to me, of course, I'm Puerto Rican, as I said earlier in the answer, but I would like to add that as a person from Puerto Rico, from the Antilles and from the Caribbean, it is very common for the people of Puerto Rico to have a Dominican grandparent or a Cuban grandmother. The same with the Dominican Republic. Pedro Muir, the national poet from Dominican Republic, his father was Puerto Rican. Eugenio María de Hostos, one of our founding fathers, I have an issue with that phrase, but one of our, with the phrase in general, one of the founding fathers of Puerto Rico, right? He also had Dominican and Cuban descent. Ramon Emeterio Betances, same thing, one of the founding fathers as well, as they call it, in Puerto Rico. So using nationalism for me is problematic, and I want to problematize that. O sea, tenemos que problematizar los nacionalismos. I do believe that in the Caribbean we are all Caribbean, and I identify, if I may say it here in public, I know they're recording this, but I have to say it. I at this point, I feel more Caribbean than even Puerto Rican. Because of that. And if you ask anybody in any of the islands, you'll see that there's a Dominican relative, a Cuban relative, a Puerto Rican relative. It's like that. And to me, that's amazing. That's beautiful. That makes us rich. Puerto Rico. That makes us literally rich. That's what gives us more beauty. So saying, okay, I identify only, with Puerto Rican, I wouldn't be totally honest. I have to always say I am Antillean, I am Antillana, and of course I adore that Latinx, that X at the end. Of course, I love it. And yes, I am Latin American, but I would like to also Latin America to hear a little bit. These little islands, we have things to say, and of course, we deserve a space, in that. Thank you for asking that.
So Denise, do you want to answer, and then maybe we wrap up and we just talk informally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I share some of the same feelings and experiences in terms of. I think most of the Latinos I grew up around identified first with their where they were born. Dominicans are very Dominican. Puerto Ricans are real Puerto Rican, and Cubans, but we also the term Latino was a place where we understood that we did share some similarities, and there was a community, and I think that a lot has to do with migrating, right, and that migration story to the U.S. And so I think language moves like we do, it evolves like we do, and it requires context, and at times, the terms Hispanic and Latino, I mean, these are very politicized terms. But also language is also very personal to us. And so I think it's important that we all sort of look through our inventory and interrogate the words and the terms that we've inherited and to think through whether we really identify with that. And the limitations of Latino, the limitations of certain terms, right? And that's okay. But I think it's important to be aware of them. And so I grew up and it was like, are you Puerto Rican or not? But that's just in terms of our immediate I think community. But really, one term that is interesting to me that gets a lot of flack is when which I get it, because I think it's a valid critique of saying Spanish people, right? I think it's really important to unpack that, right? The critiques of that tying back to Spain, right? Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of people that I, from my personal experience growing up, where Spanish people was shorthand for Spanish-speaking people. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a thing in New York that it meant something different, right? All the ladies on the block, are you Spanish-speaking? Right? And that whether you were Dominican or Cuban or Mexican or from El Salvador or wherever you were from, we are one because we're Spanish speaking. Mm-hmm. And I think for my parents' generation, that's sort of what I hear. And then, are you Puerto Rican or where are you from? Was the next question. Latino was further down on the list. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's important how certain terms can mean very different things and be used in very different ways. To create community where we can, right? Or to create distance, right?
All right, thank you all so much. Cindy is going to be selling some of Agua Dulce's books, and we can just kind of talk informally. So one more round of applause for our two guests. Thank you.